Hello, my name is Destiny Clark, and this is my MAT graduate program video for Lenoir-Rhyne University. I began my teaching career in March of 2015 through the Lateral Entry program. Lateral Entry is a program where you qualify to teach based on specific criteria set by the state. Some things I learned early in my experiences and through the program are rapport. Building a meaningful relationship with your students is the first step to having success with them. Also, building relationships with your coworkers is important. They can be of aid to you during the school year. The second thing that I learned early was that your EC and 504 modifications are very important. You must know your students' needs and provide them with the accommodations that's on their file. Also, document each time that they don't use their accommodations. The third thing that I learned early was to plan accordingly. Things don't always go as planned, but plan to teach bell to bell with backups if things don't go well. And lastly, collaborating with your mentor and other school personnel can be extremely helpful and is necessary. My teaching philosophy was developed after researching and evaluating many theories and approaches to the classroom. I emphasize teaching academic language, engaging culturally responsive content, including pop culture, and creating student-centered classrooms. It changed from the beginning of the program to now because with the connections that I've made, the exposure to resources, and my new experiences I've had as an educator thus far, I've learned how to successfully implement my philosophy. Behavioral management. So before you enter the classroom, you want to develop a behavioral management plan. Be clear with your expectations and try your very best to be consistent with them all year long. The first thing to do before you develop your own plan is to check with your mentor to see if your school has a discipline plan that they follow. At my school, it's as follows: a student warning, changing the student seat, a conference with that student. This may be outside of the classroom or privately inside of the classroom, and then a referral to the office. When it comes to referrals to the office, this is used at the teacher's discretion. However, in my classroom, the number one rule is respect. Respect your teacher, your peers, and most importantly, yourself. I always tell my students that if you're being disruptive or disrupting your own learning, that you're disrespecting yourself and that you deserve better. You can use tools like a seating chart, established routines, or nonverbal cues like just a nudge on the shoulder or coming over to the student who's being disruptive to help support your behavioral plan. Your mentor communication. So it's important to utilize your relationship with your mentor by meeting with them often. When you complete the BT program, which is carried out through the first 3 years of your teaching career, you will be required to meet with them at least 4 hours a month. But I recommend that you meet with them more often. Most likely your mentor will be in the same content area, but not always, so make sure that you befriend your department members as well. Your mentor can answer questions about school procedures, BT requirements, any lesson plans, if you're in the same content area, or if not, you can do cross-curricular work, teaching techniques, resources, or etc. They're also really great support for when you're having a bad day and it feels like you just can't carry on throughout the school year. They're there to support you. My mentor, her name is Tanya Cope. She's a North Carolina board certified teacher who's been at our school for 15 years. So she has tons of experience with many situations and many students, and she can help me with any of my needs inside of the classroom or out. So when it comes to lesson planning, the first step is to start with your state standards. So North Carolina uses the Common Core you will need to check to make sure that your specific content area doesn't have any additional standards that you will have to follow as well. When you are writing your lesson plans, you want to follow the anatomy of a lesson, and you can use the Lenore Ryan lesson plan template, or using TaskStream is extremely helpful as well. You can store all of your lesson plans in Google Drive. It's a great way to organize them, but be sure that you also back all of those up on a separate drive. I personally use Dropbox, and it saves any handouts, any presentations, or anything like that, as well as I have all of that on my Google Drive. So some things to keep in mind when you're planning is that you first want to start with the skill or the content, and remember that that's determined by the state standards for your content area. That's what you have to teach to the students based on what the curriculum is for the state. And then next you want to think about what kind of instruction you want to give to teach those skills or to teach that content. So that could be like direct instruction, like lecturing, student-led where they teach each other, collaborative learning where they're working in small groups or in pairs, or independent work if you want them to just show that skill independently. You want to have your assessment or your demonstration of the mastery of that skill or content while you are writing your lesson plan. So that assessment can be formative, it can be summative. You can do that in either a formal or informal way, but you want to make sure that you're assessing and measuring the student's progress and mastery of those skills and that content that you're teaching to them. And of course, you want to make sure that the content is relevant, make it interesting, make it engaging, maybe using some examples that they would be familiar with, or so on and so forth. So in the lesson that I provided for this course was my Socratic seminar lesson. So I wanted the students to have a way to discuss their novels in depth, but as a class. So this lesson plan was given to my Honors English 4 class in the fall of 2016. They had read either Brave New World or 1984. And so I started doing some research on Socratic seminars, what they are, how they work. And so you can look on websites that have lesson plans. They're great for like kind of having a frame of reference to start with, or finding resources if you're doing the same book or novel or content, whatever you're doing. Most of the time that you can just Google what you're looking for, but some specific sites are Teachers Pay Teachers, which is all content areas, Shmoop, which is mostly English language arts, and then News ELA, again, it's mostly English language arts, but it has many topics that are used in other content areas, and if you want, you could do some cross-curricular work there as well. So don't be afraid to use lesson plans that have been made before, or given to you by your mentor, or just shared with you in a professional development. Of course, you can adapt and you can change them to your specific needs, to the needs of your students, but don't be afraid to use work that is already out there. So for this specific lesson, the steps that I took to create the lesson were to first decide which state standards I wanted to measure the students' mastery level of. So since this was a discussion, I chose speaking and listening standards for this lesson, and then I created the rubric to scaffold what mastery of those skills would look like. I researched the Socratic seminars to understand what they are, how they work, what I needed to do in the classroom. And if you are interested in doing a Socratic seminar, I took all the desks and I put them in a giant circle and created questions for the students to discuss and kind of get the discussion going and facilitated. But before I did that, I looked at how people had done it previously on examples online. and looked at their questions and what they were asking and how they moved the conversation forward. And so I reviewed and used Bloom's taxonomy to create my own questions, and then I included some specific examples from their novels just to tailor it more towards my students and what their needs were, and to see their understanding of the novels. And then I wrote out the lesson plan using TaskStream and followed the anatomy of a lesson. So again, very important that you use the tools that are provided for you in order to write those lesson plans correctly and engage each part of the lesson. So the skills and content that I wanted to measure were the speaking and listening skills and their mastery of the content of their novels. I used whole group collaborative instruction. So again, I initiated the conversation, but then after that, I just kind of took a back seat and I facilitated the discussion, but it was mostly student driven. And then the assessment that I used was a rubric for the students to evaluate their peers' contributions, and I, of course, aligned those with the state standards. So we have many experiences as teachers that will impact us, and I had an experience during my internship this year that really impacted me greatly. I taught a student that was deported to Mexico. He, his mother, and his sister all traveled illegally to the United States many years ago in hopes of a better life. He was really, really smart, but he had not had the best experience with education. Many other teachers had warned me about his behavioral problems and his lifestyle choices, but when he was in my classroom, he treated me with respect and kindness. He tried his very best in my class, and he really enjoyed the content. He enjoyed it so much that during the semester, he submitted his research paper to a scholarship summit with EF Tours to go to Italy. He was named a final contestant, but unfortunately, he was deported a few weeks later. This experience had a lot of impact on me as a teacher because before this, I had never known anyone to be deported. The student and I had a really great relationship. Even after I taught him, he still came back to visit and said hello. And I really had felt like I made an impact on his attitude towards learning and how he felt about school. So I was very sad that, he was being deported because I knew that he had a lot of potential and that his journey was unfortunately cut short. And so as a result, I changed because I learned a great deal of empathy and understanding. I love my students and I'll support them and their families in any way that I can. And this experience kind of showed me how far I'll go for my students. There were countless afternoons where I was sitting on the phone with his mother, just, letting her cry and be upset and voice her concerns to me about how fearful she was for her family, that ICE was going to come for her next, or that, she hadn't heard from her son and that she was worried about him. And so as a result, this experience definitely made me a better teacher. Not only because of the exposure to the new experience, but that I can empathize with my Hispanic family students and their community in this very trying time, and it made me a better person. So my final advice for new teachers, my general advice to you is to first and foremost, build relationships with your students. It's so important for you to have a good relationship with your students, and it starts at the door. That as soon as they come into your classroom, all you have to do is just greet them with a smile on your face, and that is the first positive step to building a good relationship with them. I teach high school, so I have mostly older students. I teach juniors and seniors, so for example, my students have jobs after school, and I'll just ask them when they come in the next day, hey, how was work last night? And they, really appreciate being asked about their lives and you taking an interest in them. The second thing is to have a student centered classroom. You want to create an environment where it's safe, it's respectful, and they feel like they're not being judged for learning and they're not being judged for being vulnerable. I tell my students that, I'm learning in here too. I learn as much from my students as they do from me, hopefully. And so, for them to be at the very center and their learning and for them to feel like it's safe for them to do that is very important. You want to strive for a positive work-life balance. It's really, really tough. And that's a part that a lot of people really don't tell you about teaching. But the first few years of your teaching career are going to be very trying. You are having new experiences and learning all of the tips of the trade. And so, again, utilize that support system that you have in place for you and don't be afraid to take some time for yourself. I also recommend that classroom management is very strong. It can either make or break you. If you don't have good classroom management, it won't be easy for students to learn from you and it won't be easy to manage your students at all. And then remember that not every student is the same, that each one has a unique perspective that they bring to your classroom. And so, embrace those differences and embrace those, that uniqueness that each student brings to the classroom. Things that work for one student won't work for another, and your classes that you had last semester won't be the same as they are this semester. Some more specific advice as far as your classroom management. The first thing is to establish norms and expectations. If you establish your expectations, you hold them in line and hold them accountable for those expectations, then it'll be easier throughout the year to get that content across to them because you won't be wasting your time managing disruptive behaviors. Again, creating a safe, engaging, and respectful environment. It's very important for students to feel like they can share and be vulnerable in your classroom. Seating charts are very helpful, but very tricky. I would definitely get some veteran teachers to help you if you are inexperienced with making seating charts or knowing some of the students. I start with alphabetical order for the first couple of weeks of school, and then as I get to know them, I will make adjustments to the seating chart. And then nonverbal cues are really good to use in your classroom management plan because, just a touch on the shoulder or going over to the disruptive student can kind of help alleviate a situation before it gets to a point where you have to use discipline. For your instruction, always start with your standards. That too often teachers will want to teach content instead of making sure that it lines up with their state standards. For example, if I wanted to teach The Great Gatsby, but I'm not sure how I could make it fit into my state standards, that's the opposite way of how I would want to do that. So always start with your state standards, look at those skills, look at that content that you have to teach to your students, and then find resources and texts that will help you achieve those things. Have culturally responsive lessons. So it's important to mirror or to diversify your students' perspectives. So you want to have some, like if you have mostly African American class, you want to make sure that you are including writers or stories or experiences or accounts that include things from their heritage. It's very easily done in English, but in other content areas, you want to make sure that you are being culturally responsive as well. Collaborative learning is important. I let my students work in groups quite often, and I actually sit them in groups so that they can learn to collaborate with one another. They can learn some social skills, and they can they can help each other when one is not getting it or the other is. And then using multiple means of assessment, so either formal or informal assessments, formative or summative, that you don't want to just sit your students down with a paper pencil test every time that you want to measure whether they understand the content or not. You could do project based learning, you can do discussions, you can do a multitude of things that will help measure their understanding of the content or skills that they're supposed to have. And then just a few housekeeping things. Make sure that you keep a record of everything, especially attendance. Always keep a paper attendance in addition to the PowerSchool or whatever your school district uses. Um, because when students come to turn in late work, or when parents come to ask, why did you give my student a 0 on this assignment, and you can go in your records and say, well, the student wasn't here, or you have 3 days to make it up from this date, or whatever your policy is. So just make sure that you are keeping attendance and keeping record of everything that you do in the classroom. Make sure that you update your grades regularly. That way students know how they're doing. Remind them to check their grades regularly. That way they know how they're doing, not just at report card time or progress report time. And then set deadlines for yourself for student work management. So I always tell myself that I will never take longer than a week to give back the work. Unless it is an essay, I do give myself about 2 weeks to do that. But you have to set those deadlines for yourself. You're not in college anymore. Your professors can't set the deadlines for you. And so you have to set deadlines for yourself and when you'd like to get that work back for your students. So that is it. And I wish you the best of luck, everyone. And thank you very much. Bye-bye.